For those who have subscribed or watched any videos we produce on prison professors and white collar advice, I have said I'm not insane, I'm not stupid. I don't wish I went to federal prison, but since I had to go, I wanted to make the most of the experience. And I'm so proud and pleased to introduce a client and friend who I think feels the same way. His name is Lance Charen. Welcome to the program, bud. And Lance, I'm going to turn it over to you. Tell us where you are in this process, and then we'll transition into your life at Cumberland Federal Prison Camp. So where are you in this process?
I am 2 days from my final release date, currently on home confinement. It was fortunately a relatively short sentence. It was a year and a day. And I am in the home stretch of being done with my interactions with the BOP.
Not only are you in the home stretch, you are really in the home stretch because you only have 6 months probation, unlike yours truly, who had 3 years. Most defendants have at least 2 or 3. 6 months is really as good as it's going to get. Now, I opened this video by saying I'm not stupid or dumb. I don't think. Some would argue differently, perhaps. But when we spoke a year ago, before your surrender, what were some of your goals and aspirations? Certainly, like me, you didn't want to end up on the wrong side of prison boundaries. But I recall you saying to me, Justin, I want to make this the best experience of my life, as crazy as that sounds. So walk us through what some of your goals were before you surrendered to Cumberland Federal Prison Camp.
Well, between our conversations and the various videos of yours and your book that I read, I sort of fabricated goals around your guidance. And to that end, my goals were really very clear cut. There were 3 of them. I wanted to lose a significant amount of weight. When I went into prison, my report weight was 328 pounds.
Wow.
I lost more than 110 while I was in prison.
Congratulations. Fantastic, man. Good for you. Great.
I wanted to read. I hadn't read for pleasure in probably 25 years. I was like a lot of business guys, and all the reading I did was business related.
Yep.
And so my goal was to read a book a week. In the time I was in, I ended up reading 100 books in just under 10 months. So that was goal number 2. And then goal number 3 was to get my head right. And it was to sort of figure out where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do and how I wanted to use this giant reset button that the federal government dealt to me and sort of refigure my life and where I was going to go and what I was going to do. And I've now managed to do that. While I was in prison, I developed a couple of business plans. I used my network and really the filter of being in prison to determine who my real contacts and connections were and who my sort of superficial contacts and connections were, and used it as a method to determine where the strengths of those relationships were and how I could benefit from those relationships. I've got myself in a great place. I'm working on a couple of businesses. I have several job offers from contacts and friends in various industries all around the country. I really figured out what I'm interested in going forward and what's important to me now, so that as I look at these things, I'm looking at them through a different filter and a different lens to try and really determine which ones will be best for me and my family and my future, so that I don't end up in another situation like I was.
So when I spoke with Lance initially, I asked him about some of these specific goals. And what impressed me was he was able to clearly define what the goals were. When I speak with a number of defendants before they surrender to prison, and I've told people I maybe want to learn Spanish, I want to lose some weight, I wasn't truly specific in my goals. Lance, to his credit, it wasn't I'm going to lose weight. It was I want to try to get back to my weight when I was a lacrosse player in college. As tough as that may be. It's not I'm going to read 3 books. I'm going to read 100 books that relate specifically to business and leadership and etc. So it wasn't just goals. It was clearly defining them, which is a huge step further. When I spoke with Lance, I said, you don't hire us to learn how to shop in the commissary. It's easy. You fill it out. You give them the sheet. Their food's going to come down a chute. It should be longer reaching, right? Longer lasting if we're going to work together. So, or for any defendant. So let's talk about when you surrendered to prison, that first day as you were beginning to live at Cumberland Federal Prison Camp. What was that first day like? What were some things in retrospect you could have done differently, if at all? Begin to walk us through the early days of your life in federal prison.
of things through this experience, I've discovered that the sharing of information on the part of the BOP and the folks that hold you in custody is practically non-existent. The access to information is really pretty limited. I arrived early, as I had been instructed by you to do, to make sure that I didn't get caught up in things. And I don't know that I've ever been more concerned and anxious than I was that day in my entire life. Fortunately, after I proceeded through the receiving process and went through my strip search and was handed my initial uniform and everything else, and walked up into the camp itself, I was relieved to discover an old friend and neighbor who I had lost touch with over the years was the inmate assigned to giving us our tour and taking us to our bunks.
Wow.
It was rather rather wonderful, quite frankly, but it was completely unexpected and very fortunate. It's not going to happen to everybody for sure, but it was a day like none. I'll never forget it. It was that first day. The anxiety was so high and the stress was so crazy. I remember walking into my first meal was dinner that evening, and it served about 4:30, 4:45 in the chow hall. And you're in these crappy blue slides that they give you because you haven't gotten fitted out with your regular boots uniform yet. You haven't had a chance to go to commissary for sure. And you're in ill-fitting, green uniform pants. And
everyone knows you're the new prisoner. Could they make it any more obvious that you're the new guy, right?
Exactly. Everybody else is there in their gray shorts and athletic gear that they bought in the commissary. One or two guys might be in their full green uniform. And you stand out like a sore thumb. Everybody knows you're the new guy.
What I noticed I remember from my first day, like some people were reaching out to offer help and advice, and as many of people that offered advice, equally amount of people could care less. Like just were so nonchalant, went about their day, didn't even notice me. So let's go through some rapid fire questions about Cumberland Federal Prison Camp. How many prisoners in the camp, approximately?
Camp's got somewhere between 225 and 240 guys at any given time. The camp is split half and half between those in the RDAP program and those not in the RDAP program.
And what is the living situation like? At Lompoc, for example, it's a big open dorm. Where I was at Taft Federal Prison Camp, there are cubicles. What is the living situation like?
The camp is divided into two separate living buildings. In each building, there are 4 wings, and in each wing, there are 32 guys. The 32 guys are divided into 4-man cubes. So it's 2 sets of bunk beds, 2 sets of lockers, 4 chairs in each cube. And you're with there's 32 guys on a wing. Each wing's got a TV room. Each wing's got a shower room. Each wing's got a lavatory. And as long as you're in your building, you're fine. There is not supposed to be any movement between the two buildings. The building I was in, the G Unit building, is the general population building. The other building is P Unit, and that's all the guys that are in the RDAP program. Now,
I know you've met several of my clients went into Cumberland when you were already there, and I know you got a chance to meet them. And from what I've learned through email, you guys had similar routines in that you were always focused on what you could control, not obsessed with what you cannot control. For example, maybe the job you have or what time you have to eat or perhaps with whom you may bunk. Fixated on what you could control. And I think that's important for any federal prison term. So talk with us about your day. What time did you start? Did you like to exercise in the morning? You lost more than 100 pounds. What was your job like? Walk us through a typical day at Cumberland. I'm very active with the hands today. Excuse me. Walk us through a typical day at Cumberland Federal Prison Camp.
Typical day, I woke up about 7:30. The announcements would start over the PA system at 5:30, 5:45. So anytime after that, your sleep was sort of haphazard. It depended on how loud the announcements were and who was making them and how close your head was to the speaker or wherever your rack was. But I would typically get up about 7:30. Breakfast was served at 6. I think I maybe had breakfast 2 or 3 times in my whole time at Cumberland. It just wasn't worth getting up for.
Was the food? Are you just not a breakfast guy or morning guy? What was the food like? Did you not? What did they serve there for breakfast? What, you just didn't want to eat breakfast?
breakfast was typically more days. A couple of days a week it was oatmeal. The rest of the week it was what they called breakfast cake, which was some sort of cake or sheet cake that was just pretty awful.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't get up for that either. We had a much better breakfast at Taft. That's probably not worth getting up for. So would you then? Okay, so you're up at 7:30. Please proceed.
Yeah, typically I would head out. I'd go down to the track. I would start walking. I would walk anywhere from 90 minutes to 2 hours, sometimes 2.5 hours, 6 or sometimes 7 days a week, depending on the weather.
Wow.
I walked all winter long. It didn't matter how cold it was, unless it was really, really brutal.
Yep.
And unless and until they'd close outside rec due to either excessive heat or excessive cold, I was out and I was walking. There were other guys that would go into the gym and walk the gym, or that would use the makeshift weights that we had available to us that were regularly confiscated and would disappear for a week at a time, and then would get miraculously remanufactured by guys down in the warehouse. I just tried to stay away from it just because it was another thing that conceivably could ultimately result in trouble or issues. After I do my walks, I would come back, shower. It'd be just about time for lunch. They'd call us for a recall about 10:30 a.m. We would get, they'd call us over for lunch by unit sometime around 11 o'clock. Chow hall was always loud and noisy, and, lunch, Cumberland, like everything else in the BOP, is on the same federal menu, so the food is the same regardless of where you go.
Yep.
It's all a matter of which inmates are cooking on any given day and how much the CO that's in the kitchen cares. We had some COs that really cared about cooking and knew what they were doing, so sometimes the food was actually, all right. We had other COs that was just a matter of getting it out onto the table, and they didn't care, and the food was really awful. The thing you miss is flavor, because there's no spices of any kind used in everything. It's all over sugared and over salted.
Yep.
And there were no fresh vegetables or fresh fruit aside from the occasional banana or apple, and iceberg lettuce for the whole time you're there.
Yeah, I had so much heartburn the initial few months in prison from the food. I actually cannot get heartburn ever again, regardless of what I eat. My body is so conditioned to the heartburn from the processed food. My God, it was just, but you got to eat, I guess. So let's transition to, some do's and don'ts. You clearly had a productive prison routine. Why do you think it was so productive for you? Did you associate with the right people in there? Were you a loner, preferring to spend time by yourself, avoiding other people? Did you have people in your network holding you accountable? So why was your experience so productive and worthwhile, while others on the flip side of this experience call me and say, I served a year and a day, it was miserable, it was tough? Why do you think your experience at Cumberland was more productive than most?
I did a couple of things that I don't know if they're unusual per se, but they helped me a great deal. One was obviously the walking. I would, being out there and being able to burn. The biggest challenge to prison camp time is killing the time.
Yes.
It's doing the things to actually make the time go past.
Yep.
And it's a question of, do you do things that are productive and helpful, or do you do things that are just stupid and wasteful? I chose to do productive and helpful, so that meant I was walking a lot. That meant I was in the library. If I wasn't out walking or in the chow hall, I'd be in the library and I would be reading or I would be writing.
Yes.
I journaled the whole time I was in prison. I have 4 volumes now that who knows what I'll do with, but I've read them back now several times since I've been out, and I don't know that I will ever not want to read them, because quite frankly, they're a really wonderful narration as to what happened and how I overcame what to me at the time is still the worst experience of my life. I wrote lots and lots of letters. Everybody thinks you're crazy. You have access to True Links in the email system.
Yeah.
You have access to a phone if you need it. The minutes are limited, but I wrote. I found that I learned a lot more about friends that I've had in some cases for 20 and 30 years through the action of writing letters back and forth, and the ability to sort of think about what you were going to write and how you would respond. And it's a far more meaningful relationship now that I have with a lot of these people that I was writing with. I also found that there were people that didn't write, and quite frankly, I was, some of the ones that were most adamant that they would write before I went in are the ones that I never heard from.
Sure.
And that's good to find out too.
Sure. That's right. That's right. In your experience, was the time before you went in harder than life on the inside?
No question. In the last year before I went in, I put on 50, 60 pounds. It wasn't unusual for me to, on a Tuesday night, to eat a large pizza and drink 2 bottles of wine for dinner, or a burger and chicken wings and half a bottle of bourbon for dinner. The anxiety just consumed me. I couldn't function. I couldn't think. I couldn't work.
Yeah.
Isn't
it just, I look back with such, as you know, through lessons from prison, and we discussed it, I engaged in similar habits. And I don't regret much after surrendering to prison, but I so regret the way I lived and acted before I went to federal prison, because, I feel, I've said it before, I felt like my sentence was 5 years. People knock, I only served 18 months in prison, or they may say, my God, this guy's in Party Time Country Club, he served a year and a day. It's not really the time in prison. Even clients of mine that get sentenced to 5 years, they're still rounding third, heading home because they've been dealing with their white-collar crime case for so long. So do you feel in many ways it wasn't just the year and a day, it was every day before you went in you felt confined?
From the day that we were raided at my office and the FBI all came in and guns drawn in March of 2012 until my case was resolved and I actually reported to prison in November of 2017, that 5-year period was just brutal.
Tell us.
That was worse.
Yeah, and I can absolutely relate to that. For me, and I may have mentioned this to you, I found a sick, twisted irony, and this may sound terrible, of just sort of having the government subsidize the building of my business from prison. The government subsidizing getting in the best shape of my life and identifying with victims that I had created and trying to bring my network back. And I think being college athletes helped us. I'm very competitive, a little obsessive, driven. And once I began to see some progress emotionally, physically, I just kept going. I kept going. And some people thought I was crazy. Let's transition to that. You had clearly had a driven routine of exercise, reading, writing, where there's some people that said, Lance, just slow down, dude. You're good. Relax. You just got to prison. Decompress a bit. I found the crazier people thought I was or were, whatever the proper English is, the crazier people thought I was, the more I knew I was on to something. Did you feel similar? Did you have some criticizers in there?
Oh, for sure. The guys that I lived with in my cube, spectacular guys. I will be friendly with them. I got really lucky. I got a great cube. I got 3 great cube mates. I'll be friends with them forever. We have a wonderful mutual experience that nobody can ever take away from us. That said, 2 of my cube mates ran the store for our building. Yeah. And so there was more junk in my cube than we had in the commissary 15 times over. Yeah. So it would have been very easy for me to maintain those same kind of lousy habits that I had before I went in, eating junk food. And I was offered, first night I'm in, the guys sort of took pity on me, and they're like, they had a bag of chips open or a bag of cookies open. Do you want one? And I knew that if I, took that chip or took that cookie, that all of my best intentions were going to go to hell in a handbasket.
That's right.
And for the first 3 or 4 months I was there, I took nothing, and they all were astounded. They couldn't believe my fortitude and my ability to sort of stand up for what I wanted and what I believed in. And fortunately, it did wonders for me in their eyes, but it also did wonders for me in my own mind, and it let me really launch into my prison time, with the thought of doing and accomplishing these goals, but then actually giving me the foundation on which to do it.
So as we work our way to the end, every now and again I get an email or a comment on a YouTube video from someone that says, wow, these federal prison camps seem like party time. He can exercise, he can read, he can write. It's nothing like this in state prison or higher security prisons. And that very well may be true. I want to convey a couple of points. One, the time before can be harder. Coming home unprepared can be harder than the time inside. But I do want to touch on the reality, of course. This is imprisonment. You are separated from your family. There are inevitable bad days in prison. I remember my bunkie in prison lost his sister to a drug overdose, and he couldn't attend the funeral, and it's devastating to hear your name called from camp control, because that's when you know, like, why am I going down to camp control? So talk about some aspects of confinement that were difficult for you, if any, and strategies you put in place to overcome and still prepare on those hard days.
Oh, it's awful. You're absolutely correct. Fortunately, I didn't have anything as tragic as the death of a family member. But I lost one of my closest friends while I was in, and didn't have an opportunity to attend his funeral. I missed my son's high school graduation. I missed my daughter's engagement party. So I missed things that were, I missed family functions. I missed all of that. Would I look back now and am I bitter about those things? Sure. There's no human being that can say, I can get that back. But I can't carry that around with me either. And now I have to go and I have to work hard to try and, earn back the confidence and respect or just goodwill from the people whose big events in life and our connections and our relationships that were damaged. And they were damaged by my actions. Fortunately, nobody was physically hurt by what I did in my crime. There was no, actual physical damage or harm, but what I did was wrong, and I admit it, and now I have to, and I've served my time, and now I have to move on, and I have to do the things that are right for me, and I have to do the things that are right for my family, and I have to do the things that are right for the people that I've decided to continue to include in my network and in my group, my village.
So clearly you couldn't have done that if you were engaged or getting disciplinary infractions while in prison. So coming back to Cumberland for a moment, I want to touch on this. So in a camp of 200 to 300 prisoners, there probably aren't too many guards there at any one time. And I don't need to get into specifics or details, but did you see iPhones or hear about iPhones floating around and cigarettes and drugs? And just quickly talk about how easily that can derail someone's experience by getting caught up in that as we kind of wrap up here.
Absolutely. There were cigarettes in the camp. There were places and times you could go in the camp and get cigarettes or smoke cigarettes, every day of the year. There was alcohol by the brand you could order in the camp and get, you wanted a fifth of something, you could get it. There were drugs in the camp. There were cell phones in the camp. There were a couple of significant crackdowns while I was at Cumberland that resulted in big time shakedowns of us. There were suspension of privileges. TVs would get turned off for a week or 2 weeks at a time or a month at a time. The rec yard would be closed for a week or 10 days at a time. Access to the library would be taken away. Access to the gym would be taken away. Fortunately, if you keep your head down and you actively choose not to be part of that whole culture that goes on in prison, you can stay in a camp. You can stay pretty clear of it and pretty ramification free. If that's what you want to partake in, it's there. I think you're foolish to do it, but it's a community. I had a guy on my wing who was 6 weeks from going home, who had his cell phone in a public place in the building so that it couldn't be attributed to him if it was found. It was discovered and taken by the COs. We all told him, we were like, whatever you do, don't get another one. You're 6 weeks away from going home. It's not that important. Sure enough, he got another one within a week or 10 days. He was caught physically on it, and he was shipped. Now, he ended up doing almost 90 days at the SHU at Cumberland. He has since been shipped to a low-security prison down in Virginia.
Lost his good time.
Lost his RDAP time and his good time. So net, those 4 weeks of that cell phone or 5 weeks of that cell phone ended up costing him 15 months. That, to me, is just a crazy expenditure. So
there's temptation all around us, especially in federal prison as we go without things, our iPhone, women, certain foods and alcohol. So it can be very, if you can easily be tempted and swayed, which frankly leads so many good people into the criminal justice system to begin with, right? How many people in prison didn't have bad intentions, someone else orchestrated a fraud and someone swept them into it. So you have to be aware of the fact that you potentially can be influenced or manipulated, or cannot say no to temptation, because it can absolutely derail and make it harder on those that love and support you. So let's wrap up. Let me ask one final question as you have 2 days left on home confinement. Good for you. As you transition to 6 months of probation, as you reflect on your journey, can you offer a quick takeaway or some advice to a white-collar defendant who's sitting at home in a situation that we both knew well, who's looking at a time in prison, scared, nervous, resources are getting depleted, name is all over the internet as a criminal. Someone's watching this and hopefully thinking, how can these guys make me better and stronger? Why am I watching these two dudes who are on the other side? Close with a takeaway for someone who's going through this experience, please.
There is a hopeful future. Mm-hmm. If nothing else, use your time. The government is giving you a giant reset button. Mm-hmm. You'll never have the time in your life where you have no outside responsibilities other than your immediate family, with which you can focus exclusively practically on yourself. Mm-hmm. And you can improve yourself, and you can improve your life, and you can improve the lives of your family, and you can improve your future. Use your time wisely. Use the time to figure out what will make you happy, what you can do to make your life better going forward, whether it's physical, whether it's emotional, whether it's business, whether it's becoming more literate, whatever the case may be. You're handed this basket of time, and you can either piss it away and be angry about it, or you can use this opportunity where you don't have bills to pay, you don't have meals to shop for, you don't have cooking to do. Mm-hmm. You've got all this time. Use the time to better yourself, and it's not that hard to do if you choose to do it. But unfortunately, you saw it and I saw it. Too many guys just choose not to do it.
Well, Lance, I'm very grateful that you reached out once you came home, suggested that we do this video. I'll be grateful that you'll speak with clients who may be enduring time in a federal prison camp to share your experience about how productive and positive it can be. So I'm just very grateful you took the advice that we gave you to heart, and you did the hardest part, which was implementing it. So thank you for your advice.
No, Justin, thank you. Without you guys, it would have been a whole different experience.
Thank you, bud.